Hello and welcome to Motorcycle Experience, the podcast. I'm your host, Dave Hatch, along with my co-host, Colin Fraser and Cameron McFadyen. And we want to welcome you to episode 3 in our series on, we've developed a theme here. It's how to get into the sport of motorcycling. Anyway, how you doing, Colin?
Great. Happy holidays and all that good stuff.
Happy holidays to you as well. Cameron, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Happy to be here. Nice to hear from you again, Colin.
It's always nice to hear from you, Colin.
Yeah, it really is.
You're in the gray zone.
Oh, yes, you're in the gray zone.
Well, we've been enjoying some really great conversation over the last couple of podcasts, all sort of around the ultimate motorcycle experience and how did you get into the sport? What was your first impression of the sport? Why did you get hooked? What brought you in? And I know this is something that the motorcycle manufacturers here in Canada have been studying, analyzing, and wringing their hands over for, at least the last 15 years. Correct me, Colin, maybe even longer, because it's been recognized that baby boomers, gravitated to the sport back in the 60s and 70s. There was a huge migration into the sport of motorcycling. And now as motorcyclists, baby boomers are aging out of the sport, everyone is looking to the next generation to sort of say, okay, come and get into this sport. How do we get you in? What are you interested in? And part of that equation has been entry-level motorcycles. Right, Colin?
Well, I think that for a long time, the nature of motorcycles was that they were essentially entry level. They were small, inexpensive, unintimidating, easy to ride, and there were always lots of those bikes around. But particularly in North America, we stopped getting a lot of those motorcycles. They still existed, particularly for the Asian market. And I think, 15 years ago, it was a pretty big discussion point about what happened to the little bikes. And the answer was they didn't have much of a margin and they couldn't sell a great number of them because there hadn't been a lot of change. And I think it was a challenge that somebody started to realize that a 600 Super Sport bike wasn't really any kind of a good idea as an entry-level motorcycle. And, speaking on behalf of people my age with my experience, we had small displacement, very simple, very basic motorcycles. And that's what we learned on. And nobody really said entry-level back then, but they would definitely be on the smaller side by today's spectrum. So having said all of that, I think particularly Honda, more than a decade ago now, really started addressing this, and now everybody has done a good job of providing a variety of motorcycles, so you're not stuck with one kind of bike if you are looking for something entry level. And of course, entry level can mean a lot of things. It can mean cost, it can mean efficiency, it can mean your ability to handle the bike, the physical size of it, the intimidation of what it's like to operate that motorcycle. So yeah, there's a lot of different ways to look at it. I think we're in at least a renaissance, if not a golden age of entry level. There's a lot more choice, and some of the bikes are bikes that you can live with for a while. You don't have to get rid of them a year after you learn how to ride.
Do you think, David, manufacturers maybe forgot about that throughout the 80s and 90s, that if you put out an entry-level motorcycle, that is going to hook your motorcyclists in to eventually buy bigger and potentially more powerful motorcycles? Do you think they forgot about that?
Well, Colin's right. I think it came down to economy of scale. Absolutely in the 70s, we were really fortunate to have some great small displacement motorcycles. The two strokes, I'm thinking of the 250s and the 350s. They were just great for getting you hooked and getting you in. They were affordable and fast and fun, but not too intimidating. They were light because they were two strokes. They went away, and a part of it was driven by emissions, and a part of it was driven by, I'm sure, as Colin mentioned, profit. In the 80s and the 90s, let me back up, maybe the 90s and the 2000s, Colin's right, 600 Super Sport bike was considered an entry-level motorcycle. That's terrifying to me. So there weren't a lot of options in the 90s for getting into a motorcycling experience. I remember very well a friend of mine who got into the sport later in life and became a Harley fan and bought himself a Dynaglide or something like that. And it was discussed that his partner at the time, that she would get into the sport, and her entry-level motorcycle at the time was a Sportster. And my goodness, like that's a powerful, heavy motorcycle. And so, of course, her first couple of experiences on the bike were not that fun, especially when something like that falls over just off the side stand. Try picking up a Sportster when you're 5'2" and 110 pounds. So, I cannot believe where we are today looking at the market and looking at what's considered entry level. Colin's right again. Honda led the way with the 125, the CBR 125 sort of started the trend. The 250 that followed, and then a few 250s entered the market. But now in the 300 category, everyone has something, and they're great motorcycles. Eh, Colin?
Well, I think what's wonderful is that we have seen the benefits of all that R&D, and the 125 arguably is a little small for the highway. The 250s and 300s better, and then the 500s, particularly if you're a little bit taller, a bike that you, as long as you're physically comfortable when you're learning with that motorcycle. But then everybody offers a range of motorcycles, and Honda's easy because, for instance, that basic 500 twin architecture provides several different motorcycles that are quite versatile in their appearance and in their use. And of course, there's a carryover amongst a lot of common parts, which makes the bike less expensive to manufacturers and all that good stuff. And I think it still applies that in Canada, our pricing is amongst, if not the best in the world. So these bikes are more affordable here than just about anywhere else. Find a dealer you're comfortable with, or go shopping used, because there's some of these bikes, Honda 500 twins and the singles and whatnot have been around long enough, and all the Kawasaki smaller bikes, they have some nice twins, that there's a lot of good choice. And even up to like Kawasaki's 650 twin is still not too heavy. So yeah, there's a lot more choice. And what I like too is some of these bikes are pretty fun. You could take them to the track and you could have a really good time with them. They don't come up as just cheap and cheerful. They're actually quite useful.
Yeah, and fun is where I go with all of those bikes, those 300s. When I think of, Kawasaki's 300, Yamaha's, Honda's, BMW's 310, they're all just so much fun. And then don't forget the whole movement that's happening now in the dual sport or dual purpose category. All the manufacturers now are offering something in like the 250 range, and they're just a whole lot of fun.
Yeah. One of the things that I wanted to bring up too is let's not forget about something that I started on, which was a scooter.
Right. Here's a full-fledged motorcyclist who started out on a BMW super scooter, Colin.
Yeah. And the reason I did it is I was a bit intimidated. I wanted to really learn how to properly ride a motorcycle, so that the shifting was a little bit intimidating at the time. So for me, learning on a scooter for I think it was 3 years I had that bike, really honed my skills on the road, and then switching to a regular clutch motorcycle, I felt way more comfortable on that.
Well, it's interesting. My daughter went the other way. She, climbed the ranks from a teenager through various street bikes up to a 500 twin, and now she has a 175 scooter because she lives downtown, and that's a much more useful and appropriate motorcycle for how most of her riding goes. And she still likes to ride bigger bikes when the opportunity presents, but a scooter suits where she lives and what she does very well.
Yeah, it's funny, when we think about entry-level motorcycling, the scooter thing doesn't even hit the radar, but, Cameron's a great example of that. Yeah, scooters.
I'd still go the same way too if I was starting out, and I would still recommend to people to do that. I mean, if you're scared of some bikes, I mean, obviously the newer bikes coming out, especially those 300 series bikes that you mentioned, David, they're a lot less intimidating now. But I would still recommend to new riders, don't overlook those scooters, because they're a ton of fun to ride.
Well, I know they're super popular in the province of Quebec, and I think the licensing situation there allows teens to get onto scooters at the age of 15. I think it has to be a 50cc scooter, but it's a great way to bring young people into the sport. Colin, are entry-level motorcycles the answer in terms of attracting the next generation?
I think so, for a number of reasons, including just the reality of what larger displacement motorcycles are like in terms of the cost to own them and operate them and insure them. And not everybody is in that situation where they want to commit to that degree. There's a lot of competition for your leisure time spending. So having a motorcycle that is maybe a little more flexible and less costly in a number of ways that you can maybe get more use out of over time, that it becomes integrated into everything you do. And my daughter on the scooter is a perfect example. To get the most use out of the vehicle, the scooter is what suited her. So yeah, I think all those things come into play, because not everybody necessarily wants to wind up on a 1200. And I think a lot of people are intimidated about the notion that that's how motorcycling works. I've always felt like just, get what you think is fun and do it. And in racing, some of the most impressive race bikes ever are 250 two-stroke twins, and in terms of absolute lap time, they're about as fast as anything. So you don't necessarily have to go deep. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and of course, if you start looking at vintage and historic and classic motorcycles, a lot of those smaller motorcycles are really cool. And Dave and I both have a fair bit of experience with Ducati singles, just to take an easy example.
Yeah, that's a great example. I just don't know whether how we can stress this enough, but we've been on a lot of press launches over the years, Colin and myself, and it's incredible the difference between a small displacement press launch. I'm talking about a 300, a 400, a 500 motorcycle on a press launch, and the larger displacement bikes. You get together with a bunch of journalists, these jaded, veteran, mature individuals who've been riding for years, and you get together with them, and if it's a small displacement motorcycle, the amount of fun and smiles and grins and silliness that takes place, it's incredible, the difference between the feel of those launches. I'm thinking back to even we were down in the States somewhere with Honda for the launch of the 125, and they had rented a racetrack for us. And do you remember?
In Miami.
Was it in Miami?
Yeah.
And Dave Booth, journalist David Booth, was just, we couldn't get him off the bikes. He was just having way too much fun. Do you remember that, Colin?
Well, I do, as a matter of fact, because I helped organize that event, but I was actually busy running a race at Daytona and heard about all this secondhand at Homestead, and definitely lots of positive reports. And the late Rob Harris, I think, too, was having about as much fun as you can have with your clothes on.
Yeah, so that's, I think, was definitely a turning point where we could see that the manufacturers were starting to get serious about attracting new riders and allowing them to have access to motorcycles that would not be intimidating and not be too heavy.
I think now too, with the technology that's come forward now for the 300C. I mean, specifically, we're talking about the 300 series. ABS is now available, and some of them you can now get traction control. I mean, that's a big thing too, right? When you get on a bike, and I can't even imagine riding a bike now without ABS. It's such a huge difference. So having those safety tools, if you want to call them that, really is a big factor for entry level and getting into motorcycling.
Well, it's interesting, Cam. You mentioned that your wife did very well at the motorcycle school, but had a minor crash with the front brake at low speed. And I don't know if that bike had ABS, but that's the kind of thing that really, so often, even teaching people at the track, really scares people and puts them off. And that's why I think ABS is so important, because nobody's perfect, and it's a great safety net, and it really does prevent a lot of those minor crashes that can be so frightening and intimidating and really put you off. And if you have the ABS, yes, you still need the skills that would help you in an emergency situation. But I think it's crazy. Most motorcycles now come with ABS, but you're crazy to try and save $300 not to get it. Yeah. And that whole suite of electronic aids that are available on a lot of motorcycles really make it so much safer. And you're not so worried about damaging your motorcycle or yourself or scaring yourself, which I think scaring yourself is actually the worst part of it.
I think you guys talked on the show too about how far ABS has come from what it was to what it is now. Maybe David, you could talk about what it was before, maybe to what it is now, and how good it is now.
Well, it's incredible now, and before I tell you that story, I will mention that I bumped into a woman about 2 weeks ago at the post office here, and she came up to me, and she's a lovely lady, and she's probably in her 50s, and I think she's decided that she wants to learn to ride. And so she said, I'm looking at getting one of these CB 500 Hondas, and she knew the model and she knew what she wanted, and she said, but I just can't decide. Do I spend the extra $400 and get the ABS? What is ABS? And do I need it? Is it an extra? Are they trying to upsell me? I had to laugh, and but we discussed it, and I explained how the systems work and why it's important to have it. And for $400, don't even think about not getting ABS. I remember when ABS was first introduced to us as journalists, it was a BMW launch, and they had taken the time to lay down a bunch of sand. This might have happened even at Shannonville with your involvement, Colin. I can't quite remember where we were, but the first generation ABSs were definitely clunky and loud, and when they engaged, you knew they were engaged. The wheels would kind of turn clunk, 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 a third at a time. And I remember the journalists all standing around going, oh, this is crazy, and who needs this, and will it work, and we can brake better than that. But today, oh my goodness, we've come so far with ABS, you don't even know for the most part if it's even happening until the event is over. They're so sophisticated, and I couldn't imagine riding a motorcycle today without it. Hey, Colin?
And it leads directly to one of my favorite things. It's still a little bit of a touchy subject, which is linked braking, which I think is a terrific thing and really helps people with their riding. But yeah, ABS is, I don't mean to be judgmental. It's a no-brainer. Everybody should have ABS. It shouldn't be a matter of debate. It doesn't replace skills that would go with ABS, but having it in the case of emergency, the whole point is emergencies, right? If we knew we were going to crash, we simply wouldn't do the thing that leads to the crash. So I think realistically, it keeps so many people from having one of those incidents similar to what we discussed with Cam and his wife when she was learning, because it's sad when people are excited about something and they have that one bad experience and it sets them back. And that low speed parking lot type situation, it's so easy to lock up the front wheel, and ABS, broadly speaking, will ensure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, and they're just the selection that's available to you now, the choice that's out there to find the right bike for you. It's just phenomenal. And I think we're sitting here recording this podcast during a global pandemic at the end of the first year that we've been exposed to this situation. And the manufacturers here in Canada are riding on a high. They have had all of them have had incredible years in terms of sales. And what I'm hearing is just how many mini bikes and dual sport bikes and trail bikes that have been sold over the past summer here in Canada. It's incredible. And I hope that the kids, the parents that have been going out and buying their kids these bikes and getting them out riding, I really hope that they stay with it, and these kids go on to getting into street riding someday.
Yeah, I mean, for just going back to the whole scooter thing, it was a great way for me to get into the sport, but there did come a time where I sort of got the itch to want to do the whole clutch and get that whole pure motorcycle experience out of my motorcycle riding. And so let's not discount the scooters when we're talking about all of these entry-level motorcycles. I'm a big proponent of it, and yeah, I'm a 6'1", 200-pound guy that's proponent for scooters, but
but have you ridden your scooter 800 kilometers in one day during a rally?
Can't say that I have. Actually, David,
I'm the kind of person who does that.
Yeah,
David, you took those scooters on a BMW Roads down to Woodstock, was it?
That's right.
You took the C600s down, right?
Yeah. No, Colin just referenced the Mad Bastard Rally. Rob Harris, God bless him, organized that every year. Crazy fun. Again, fun keeps coming up.
Yeah, fun.
And one year, Norm Wells and I decided we'd go on one of our ultimate rides using I think it was the 650 GT and the touring version. And we went down to Woodstock. It was the anniversary of Woodstock, the event. We rode down the Catskill Mountains with these things, and heated seats, heated grips, adjustable windshields.
Changing your leg positions on long rides, yeah.
It was a great experience. It was a super touring experience on a scooter. So we will not discount our scooter fans out there as a way to get into the sport. Any last words as we wrap things up today, Colin?
No, just I think that if you're wondering what's available, unfortunately we don't have the bike shows at the moment, but there's really a host of really good material. And if you start looking online in terms of beginner or entry level, there's a lot of really good videos explaining some of the basics, and of course making sure that the bike's a size and a shape that fits you when you're comfortable with the weight and the handling.
Excellent advice there. Well, thank you very much for joining me today, guys. Cameron McFadyen, Colin Fraser, thank you so much. For myself, Dave Hatch. Keep tuning in, folks, to the Motorcycle Experience podcast. And until the next time, keep your feet on the pegs and your right hand cranked. Bye for now, guys.